Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. Today I wanted to make a real quick video showing you guys my Frozen Orb Sorcerer after pretty much a day of playing. I've been just completely demolishing the game using this build. I've had it set up since about level 70 or so, and I've just blasted to level 100 with this, and now that I'm at level 100 and my gear is a little bit more optimized, I figured I would just make a quick video showing you guys where the build is at. This is very, very far from perfect, and there's still a few things that I want to test, but I figured out a lot of stuff that has drastically helped with the build. And I've had a ton of you guys asking me over on Twitch. Make sure to follow me there if you haven't already. Or if you have any questions, feel free to drop by twitch.tv/Nick2. Had a ton of people asking me what my build is. So I figured real quick I would just make a video to show you guys how you want to set up Frozen Orb Sorcerer so you can absolutely demolish like this. The only downside of this build is going to be the boss damage. It is not nearly as good as like Minion Necromancer, for example, but you're going to clear dungeons faster than pretty much anybody else in the whole game, and you will just absolutely demolish stuff. The damage is really, really good against normal enemies. You're permanently crowd controlling, and the build is going to be really good once you have like perfect gear. But like I said, I literally just hit level 100 a few hours ago. Like Season 4 hasn't even been out for a day yet. So this is a very preliminary version of the build, but it's like 90% of the way there. Just a lot of my gear and some stuff is not perfectly min-maxed, but let's just get into it. If you weren't already aware, Frozen Orb is pretty good this season and one of the best builds for Sorcerer because of the new amulet Fractured Winterglass. You get this from killing Lord Zir. In order to kill Lord Zir, you need Exquisite Blood. How you can get Exquisite Blood, the best way is from doing Helltide, and you go in there and there's an event called the Accursed Ritual, I think is what it's called. You summon a boss, and every time you kill her, she drops 1 Exquisite Blood. So you definitely want to go in there with a group of 4 people. You kill her 1 time, you get 4 Exquisite Blood. It's kind of the most tedious material in the entire game to farm, unfortunately, and you could kill the boss 50 times and never get it. I was fortunate enough to get one, but I wouldn't really recommend playing Frozen Orb until you get this. It's going to be really tough in terms of mana, and unless you have like a really well thought out setup and you have really good gear, it's going to be pretty tough without the amulet. If you're looking for a build prior to running Frozen Orb, I'd highly recommend my Firewall build. I will leave a link in the description for that. You can use that all the way up to level 100 if you want, and just have a Minion Necromancer help you farm for Lord Zir. But once you get this amulet, you can start blasting with Frozen Orb without any problem. The reason that the amulet is so good, anytime you cast a Frozen Orb, it has a chance to spawn a Conjuration. And then your Conjurations have a chance to spawn Frozen Orb. So basically, you Frozen Orb, it'll spawn a Conjuration, and then this Conjuration will also spawn more Frozen Orbs. Unfortunately, I have the lowest roll here, and they actually nerfed it since the PTR, but if you have a higher roll, 50% of your Frozen Orbs will spawn a Conjuration. This pairs very, very nicely with Conjuration Mastery. You can get like up to 5 ranks on the amulet, which gives you multiplicative increased damage per Conjuration out, movement speed, which will movement speed cap you, and movement speed gives you crit chance, and mana regeneration. Once the build is perfectly set up, you can get around 13 to 15 Conjurations out per second, so you can multiply this number by 13 to 15. But like I said, you can get plus 5 ranks on the amulet, and I only have plus 1. It's also very good because Conjurations themselves in the form of Lightning Spear is incredibly powerful. Anytime that they crit, it's going to apply Vulnerable for you, so you permanently have Vulnerable up, and it is going to stun pretty much everything on the map. Also, because you are spawning so many Frozen Orbs with all of these Conjurations, you're just doing a ton of damage, and it's also going to chill enemies and pretty much instantly freeze everything on the map. So you get a lot of raw damage and a ton of crowd control. The biggest problem with this build is actually mana. I'll have a mana section of the video because that is the biggest problem when you first transition into the build. When it comes to the skills that you want to use, you want Firebolt for Firebolt enchant because you just get extra damage against enemies that are burning, and it's good for survivability. And the rest of the skills are just classic Sorc. Flame Shield for the immunity and the unstoppable. Ice Armor is good because there's a new node where anytime you spend mana, it reduces the cooldown while it's active. And when Ice Armor is active, you get mana regen, and it's just nice for the barrier. But this is probably the only skill I'd recommend swapping out. Teleport, we always want teleport, damage reduction, movement speed. And then on the actual bar, I have Ice Blades. This could also be Lightning Spear, but Ice Blades you can spam a little bit more because it has inherent cooldown reduction. And then I have Unstable Currents. This is just for fighting bosses for the attack speed. This is pretty like optional, and if you're having mana problems, you don't want to use Unstable Currents, you will just throw Lightning Spear on the bar. We have the talent points into Lightning Spear because when we throw out our Frozen Orbs, we are spawning the Lightning Spear, therefore getting the value out of the vulnerable here, and also stunning enemies. I'll just real quickly go over the skill points. The build link will be in the description, of course. So we go into Frozen Orb, and then we want the mana restoration. We already have vulnerable with our Lightning Spear, so the mana here is really key. And then we go Devastation and Elemental Dominance for increased damage, Teleport damage reduction, Ice Armor for the mana and cooldown reduction, and then Glass Cannon for raw damage. Protection, very good for permanent barrier uptime, which we need for our legendaries and for survivability. Mana Shield, obviously 24% DR. And then Conjuration Mastery. Like I said, on the amulet, you can get this up to +5 ranks. So this is like your bread and butter right here. This is the scaling of the build. Then Devouring Blaze, so we get extra crit damage against enemies that are on fire, which they are because of Firebolt enchant. And then we get Permafrost for damage, Hoarfrost, and Icy Touch for damage. And then I have the 2 points into Unstable Currents just for the attack speed fighting bosses. When it comes to your key passive, for a while I was using Avalanche, which is kind of nice, but our lucky hit is pretty low, and the only time we will really need this is kind of against bosses for the free mana cost. Turns out that Veer's Mastery damage increase is actually bugged and works for all skills, so you will permanently get a 20% multiplicative damage increase to close enemies and 25% damage reduction against close enemies. So not only is it survivability, it's also raw damage. You'll see that I also have 3 points into Frigid Breeze here, and this is where I want to take a second to talk about mana, because mana is a huge problem with this build when you first swap into it. So I want to go over all the ways that you can solve your mana. This build has an interesting interaction with attack speed, because the more attacks you can get out per second, the more Frozen Orbs you spawn, which then is the more Conjurations that you spawn, and the more Conjurations you spawn, the more you benefit out of Conjuration Mastery, therefore giving you more mana regeneration multiplicatively, which will increase your mana regen per second. The reason this is important and why I mention attack speed is because they drastically reduced how much you can get on gear now. You can't get it on your weapons anymore, and the rolls that you can get it on, they reduce the actual amount. So our attack speed is going to feel pretty low, therefore early on it's going to be hard to get Conjuration Mastery, but later on you kind of rely on this for your mana when the build is perfectly set up, once you can have more ranks to this on your amulet, and you're able to more consistently have like 10 to 15 conjurations per second. But when you start out, you're only going to have like 5 to 6 stacks of this, and then your mana is going to be really rough. The biggest thing I'd recommend for mobbing, just generally clearing the map, is going to be putting 3 points into Fiery Surge. So I'd take it out of Frigid Breeze, or I'd take it out of Unstable Currents, and I'd go into Fiery Surge. I don't have enough gold to respec right now. Whatever. Okay, so that's unbelievable. Gold is like such a problem right now. Anyways, Fiery Surge will give you 45% mana regen anytime you kill a burning enemy. You are burning enemies with Firebolt enchant. This mana regen gives you 45% of your base regen. But this base regen, right now it's 22 per second for me, so I'd get 50% increase of this, so this would go up to like 31 or so. The reason this is good is because you can get mana per second on your gear, which is like the second best way to get extra mana. So you get mana per second on your gear. I have 9 right now. And then you add on Fiery Surge, you're generating 30 mana per second. So every second, that's an entire cost of Frozen Orb. The second best way early on to fix your mana is to use Elixirs of Resourcefulness. This gives you 20% resource cost reduction. Very, very nice. If you're still having mana problems like I was using, you can use Frigid Breeze. It's a lucky hit chance to restore mana. It's not a lot of mana, but you're going to have mana problems early on, so I would highly recommend grabbing that. More cooldown reduction kind of results in more mana because you'll have Ice Armor up more of the time, and you'll be able to spawn your Conjurations a little bit more, therefore getting more Conjuration Mastery stacks. If you are still having mana problems, on one of your pieces of gear, on one of your rings, you can add Prodigy Aspect here. Using cooldown gives you some mana. This will help a little bit, but it's really not that great, so I wouldn't really go for it. Umbral Aspect is very good for ad clearing. If you're having problems in dungeons, even if you're using Fiery Surge, you could add this on. Your main problem is really going to be fighting bosses. When you're just mobbing, doing dungeons, if you have Fiery Surge, you shouldn't run out of mana. But bosses is really where it becomes a problem. As you can see in the gameplay right now, I'm not having any mana issues because I have the mana per second and I have the lucky hit node and my attack speed is high enough. So it doesn't really take all that much, but once you start to incorporate all of these things, then you will be fine. The other ways to increase your mana efficiency is to get resource cost reduction on your rings. For resource generation, resource cost reduction, in my opinion, is better though. Last thing that you can do is to use Tibalt's Will, but it is pretty weak. You get 50 resource anytime you become unstoppable, which is teleport and flame shield. I don't really think it's that necessary at all. I've been able to be fine without it, but those are all of the ways to solve your mana. I would highly recommend trying all of those when you first swap to the build, because otherwise your mana is going to be pretty miserable. Let's quickly go over legendaries. There's a bit of variability here. This is currently what I have. Once you get perfect gear, things are masterwork, greater affixes, etc. You can swap some of this stuff around, but I'm just going to go over generally what you guys want to be looking out for. So when it comes to aspects, you want to have the Frozen Orbit aspect. Frozen Orb explodes extra times. This is just a ton of extra damage. You want Conceited aspect, damage while you have a barrier up. You want Storm Swell. This is somehow, I've only gotten a 19% Storm Swell, but this is just 30% increased damage. Shredding Blades aspect, giving you vulnerable damage, apparently is bugged and only gives you half of the value, so you don't want to look out for that. And I recommend Accelerating aspect. Later on, you might not need Accelerating, but the build feels really, really bad with low attack speed. You can, instead of Accelerating, go for Shredding Blades if you want, or Aspect of Control. But I hate having no attack speed, so I go for Accelerating. And then I have Talrasha, which is just additional damage. Alternative to Talrasha, you can have a Resource Legendary, or like I said, you could have Aspect of Shredding Blades or Aspect of Control. And then, of course, you want the Amulet. Highly recommend getting Esu's Heirloom as soon as possible. Otherwise, you just want a Movement Speed Legendary, but you'll basically movement speed cap yourself all the time, so this is effectively 30% crit chance, and it comes with mana cost reduction on it, which is really nice. For damage reduction legendaries, Ever Living is the best you can get, just 25% DR all the time. Disobedience early on is really good so that you can armor cap yourself. You don't really want to use Juggernaut because that's going to increase your evade cooldown, and you want to be evading with Esu's Heirloom to get the movement speed cap for crit chance, but it's kind of min-maxy, don't worry about it. If you're having trouble reaching armor cap, use Juggernaut. But later on, once you get enough affixes that are tempered with armor and you get armor on your gear, you won't need a armor affix at all, and you could just go into more damage reduction. I just have Disobedience. And then on the pants, I have Concentration, which is DR whenever you cast a Conjuration skill. Alternatively to that, you can use Tibalt's Will for 20% increased damage, and you get damage reduction from close enemies on that as well, but you will lose out on some flat armor, intelligence, and max HP. When it comes to rolls on gear, this is still somewhat in the air because there's some min-maxing to be done, but this is what I found to be the best currently. On the helmet, I'd recommend getting intelligence, mana per second, and cooldown reduction, and you could swap out one of those damage rolls like intelligence for max HP if you prefer. I was unfortunate enough to not get cooldown reduction, but I quite like this. The 6 mana per second is huge for me. On the chest, you also pretty much want the same thing. Intelligence, max HP, mana per second. On the gloves, mine are terrible. You want ranks to Frozen Orb, and hopefully that's a greater affix, attack speed, and crit chance. You can only get attack speed on gloves and ring, and one of our rings is taken up with Talrasha, so attack speed anywhere you can get it is really, really nice, and that is why we use a one-hand. I'll get into that in a second. On the pants, if you're not using Tibalt's Will, you want intelligence, max HP, and armor. Alternative to armor, there's not really anything good on pants, to be honest. Boots, you want Esu's Heirloom, or you can just get normal boots with like movement speed. Nothing else is really that good on boots. For your weapon, you either want a wand or a dagger. It doesn't really matter. You want a one-hander because a staff is going to have less attack speed, and it feels really, really bad. It has 1.0 attack speed, so you lose 20% attack speed. And with a one-hander, you can use an offhand that has crit chance, and you can get intelligence on it, and you can get cooldown reduction on the offhand, which is really nice. So I would not recommend using a staff. On your one-hander, you want intelligence. They really nerf what you can get on the one-hander. It's kind of unfortunate. There's not really that much good stuff, to be honest. You can get int, crit damage, max HP, and if you want to swap max HP for percent damage for like a tiny bit of extra damage, you can. Life on hit is like okay if you want healing. Chance to restore resource is okay if you're still having mana problems, but you shouldn't need it. For the offhand, you want to have int and crit chance. Those are the two most important things. And for the third thing, you can get cooldown reduction. Resource cost reduction is okay if you're having mana problems. Mana on kill you should not need because you should only run out of mana against bosses, and even then, I don't have that problem anymore. So I would prefer to have cooldown reduction here. Chance to restore resources okay, but really make sure you get the crit chance and the int. That's really good. On the rings, these are set in stone. You want attack speed, crit chance, and intelligence. I guess I forgot to mention tempering, so my bad. When it comes to the tempering affixes, just supplement with armor or max HP if you need it on like any of your defensive pieces. On all of your offensive pieces, just go for cold damage, and then utility, you can either go for a lucky hit chance to like daze or something for more boss stagger, or just stun slash freeze duration. You want cold damage or vulnerable damage on your weapons. Cold damage and vulnerable damage are essentially the same because you're permanently applying both of these. However, you want to make sure to get a good amount of cold because Frigid Fate in the Paragon board is going to scale off of cold damage, and you just want to make sure that this is capped. But once this is capped, vulnerable damage and cold damage are the same. When it comes to your weapon tempers, the biggest thing you can possibly get is chance for frozen orb projectiles to cast twice. You will need this. This drastically increases your damage. You have a 40% chance for frozen orb to cast twice, and when you're upgrading it, ideally this is where the masterwork lands. And same thing, you just want cold damage, and temper on the ring, you want resource cost reduction. That's pretty much it for the build. If you are speed farming dungeons, highly recommend using Elixir of Momentum. 45% movement speed is pretty insane. You just fly through the dungeons, but you may have some mana issues when running into bosses using that, so craft Elixir of Resourcefulness. These are insane. I'm not sure if there's a level 3 version, but crafting these is super cheap. I'll just show you guys real quick. Like, you can do this right off the rip. The second that you swap to this build, I would instantaneously start crafting these. Advanced elixirs. I don't think you can get a level 3, but like, it costs absolutely nothing. Just craft these, go farm some herbs if you need to. The build is way better with this. 20% reduction is drastically going to improve your quality of life with this build. When it comes to gems, getting resistance cap is pretty easy. I have the Paragon board set up to where you can very easily get your resistance cap. And when it comes to your armor, you can either go for rubies for max HP, or you can go for topazes for damage. I'm going to start farming bosses, so I just wanted a little bit more damage with intelligence. But if you want to farm pit and stuff, you full send max HP, and later on, you won't need as much armor rolls, and you can just get a crazy amount of max HP, and that will be your best bet. You can probably get over like 25,000 max HP, but I'm not like full survivability oriented right now. Right now I'm pretty early on into the process, and I am leaning a lot towards damage. Paragon board will be posted over on the website. This is a level 100 version of it. If you need like a leveling one, let me know and I'll try to focus on that and make one. But this one is pretty focused on getting a lot of damage reduction without having to sacrifice much damage. Credit to MD821. I don't know if he even cares, but credit to him. I pretty much stole this from him. It's very similar to how I would set it up, so I really liked how he did it, and I swapped around some glyphs. But you get a ton of damage reduction. I need to level up this glyph, but you get a ton of damage reduction, ton of glyphs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 glyphs, and you get a lot of these nodes, which are really powerful in the form of Icefall, 15% damage, Frigid Fate, 30% damage, and these glyphs are just really good. That's pretty much it for the build. If you have any questions, feel free to check me out over on Twitch, and just leave a comment down below. Hopefully you guys found it helpful. If you did, please be sure to drop a like, blah, blah, blah. Actually, let's run a pit run real quick. I forgot that I was going to do that. We'll run a pit run live for you. I haven't done too much pit. Like, I don't know where the build currently caps out at. I could certainly go for way more survivability if I wanted to. I seem to be able to just absolutely annihilate like normal mobs, but the only problem that I've only died one time in the pit in the last like few hours, and that was when I was fighting bosses. I died to one boss, so this should probably be pretty fine. I forgot to spend skill points, so I don't have unstable currents right now, because I was demonstrating that, so that's cool. Hopefully I can spend my skill points, otherwise I need to edit this. I need to edit this out and TP out. Okay, I got my unstable currents, and I had 2 points there. Whatever, that's fine. Alright, we can play the game. I guess when it comes to playing the build, you kind of just spam your skills on cooldown, save your flame shield for whenever you need it. Once you have more attack speed, you can spend more mana, and then you can have your ice armor active a little bit more often. But Blizzard really nerfed our attack speed, and it feels kind of bad relative to how it used to be. Like, I like having a lot of attack speed personally, and that's why I use accelerating. But more attack speed equals more conjurations out, equals more damage and more mana regen, right? So I'm a big fan of the attack speed. I think it's really good, even if, like, I don't know. I think accelerating is pretty mandatory, but if you don't want accelerating or you're still having mana problems, you could take accelerating off, because if you have lower attack speed, then you're spending less mana per second if you have less attack speed. And some people don't really care about having like a slower animation time, but for me, it really bothers me. It just like slows down the gameplay. You could argue Unstable Current is pretty bad for doing the pit. As you can see, everything kind of just dies in there like pretty high level. You could argue that Unstable Current is pretty bad for pit because like it's pretty low uptime. I really just use it for bosses. If I was like trying to push higher tiers of pit, I would probably take Unstable Currents off, and I would just put Lightning Spear on the bar because that's also an additional conjuration that you're spawning. And it's nice for more consistency. Like right now, I'm not killing these guys because I don't have a Lightning Spear out, so they're not vulnerable. But the second the Lightning Spear goes out, stuns everything, makes everything vulnerable, and GG. The build will be way better. Here, I won't use the Shrine. The build will be way better once you have more cooldown reduction too. You can spam your teleport more often, and just use everything more often, and it's really nice. You may actually, I forgot to mention, you may actually want Godslayer Crown if you just want more raw damage. I have not been able to get one, and I kind of forgot to mention it, but Godslayer Crown is max HP and cooldown reduction. You will just lose the defensive aspect, but if you're like fighting bosses, or you're just doing like, you know, normal pit runs, maybe speedrunning or something, it is a good bit of extra damage. I'd say it's mainly good for like nuking a boss right off the rip. Like I said, the biggest problem with this build is actually its boss damage. This is the boss that killed me earlier, so maybe I have to actually try. The biggest problem with this build is the boss damage relative to like Minion Necro and other builds, right? Like I'm not nuking the boss by any means here. Somehow it isn't vulnerable. Later on, when you have it perfectly set up and you have like a lot of lucky hits, chance to like CC and daze and all this stuff, you will stagger the boss way faster. And once the boss is staggered, you do significantly more damage. I also actually have to try and like dodge and stuff right now. If I was a Minion Necro, sure I would have killed the boss way faster, but the Minion Necro also hasn't cleared this far into the dungeon yet, right? So, like, this build is really, really fast, and once the damage is a little bit more optimized, the boss damage will be better. But I really like it for just, like, you know, general map clearing. And again, this is a pit 47. You don't really need to do this high of a pit yet. And for bossing, you can just have, like, your Minion Necros and your Druids help you out. So that was a pit run. Once I have, you know, like I said, stuff more optimized, like masterworked, better gear, like gloves that don't suck. I think the biggest upgrade I can get is a Fractured Winter Glass with like more ranks to Conjuration Mastery and not this terrible roll. Once I have that, the damage will literally be like twice as good as it was. But that is the biggest downside with this build, is the boss damage. I still need like 11% on a Storm Swell. Anyways, hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later. Peace.